Space station Epsilon 9 hung in the void like a giant metal starfish with a bad case of technological acne. This was humanity's newest diplomatic achievement, getting permission to station exactly one human aboard the Grax'than military training facility. The Grax'thans imagine if velociraptors evolved opposable thumbs and a superiority complex had graciously allowed this cultural exchange as a gesture of interspecies cooperation. At least, that's what the official documents said. The reality was more like, let's keep an eye on these unpredictable apes before they do something stupid. Lieutenant Jack Murphy was that one human, 6 feet tall with a runner's build, perpetually smirking, and with a military haircut that screamed I follow orders, but I'm thinking sarcastic thoughts the entire time. Jack had been aboard Epsilon 9 for 3 standard months, and the novelty of being surrounded by 8-foot-tall reptilian warriors had worn off approximately 2 months and 29 days ago. Human Murphy called the station AI through the speakers in his quarters. Your presence is required in the mess hall in 15 minutes. Jack groaned and rolled out of his bunk. Tell Commander Vrex I'll be there in 20. I would not recommend delaying, the AI replied in its perpetually cheerful tone. The commander mentioned that tardiness would result in cleaning the waste recycling tubes. Fine, 15 it is. Jack pulled on his uniform, a concession to human physiology that resembled standard Earth military fatigues, but with the addition of temperature regulation units. Grax'thans preferred their environment about 10 degrees warmer than comfortable for humans. The corridors of Epsilon 9 were high-ceilinged and wide, designed for beings significantly larger than humans. As Jack made his way to the mess hall, he passed several Grax'thans who regarded him with their typical mixture of curiosity and dismissal. Their scaled skin ranged from deep burgundy to forest green, with ridges running along their forearms and spines. They moved with predatory grace despite weighing twice what a human did. Small, soft one. A particularly large Grax'than nodded at him. This was Traz, one of the few who bothered learning any human language beyond the mandatory diplomatic phrases. Morning, big scary one, Jack replied with a mock salute. He'd learned that Grax'thans appreciated directness. Anything else they considered manipulation, a trait they found distasteful but assumed all humans excelled at. The mess hall was more crowded than usual. At least 30 Grax'thans were gathered around Commander Vrex, who stood on a raised platform. Vrex was the oldest Grax'than on the station, his scales faded to a dull bronze, with scars crisscrossing his hide like a roadmap of bad decisions made by his former opponents. Ah, the human arrives, Vrex announced, his translator perfectly conveying his tone of mild disdain. Now we can begin. But Commander Vrex didn't waste time with pleasantries. Grax'thans considered politeness a form of deception, which explained a lot about their diplomatic relations with other species. Today marks the beginning of the 3rd training cycle. Vrex's voice boomed through the mess hall. As per tradition, we will hold combat assessment trials to establish baseline capabilities and identify areas for improvement. Jack suppressed a groan. He'd heard about these assessments from the station's medical officer, a 4-armed being named Quicks who enjoyed sharing horror stories about the injuries they treated after these events. All personnel will participate, Vrex continued, his reptilian eyes scanning the room before settling pointedly on Jack, even our diplomatic guest. Well, shit. For those unfamiliar with the process, which was Vrex speak for the human, these are non-lethal combat scenarios designed to test reflexes, tactical thinking, and physical capabilities. Medical intervention is available for serious injuries. The definition of serious was probably where human and Grax'than perspectives diverged significantly. Partners will be assigned randomly to ensure fair matchups. Vrex tapped on his datapad, and pairings began to appear on the large display behind him. Jack watched nervously as names scrolled by. He recognized most of the Grax'thans now, knew their combat specialties and personalities. Some would be merely terrifying opponents, others would be nightmarish. Lieutenant Murphy, Vrex announced with what Jack swore was the Grax'than equivalent of a smile, you will be paired with Grax'thal. A collective hissing sound, the Grax'than version of ooh, rippled through the crowd. Jack's stomach dropped to somewhere around his ankles. Grax'thal was the station's combat instructor. 9 feet tall, with obsidian scales and reputation for breaking bones during friendly demonstrations. He stepped forward, his clawed hands flexing at his sides, head tilted in that predatory way that made humans instinctively want to climb trees. "Commander," Jack spoke up, "I'm not sure this qualifies as a fair matchup." Vrex made a dismissive gesture. "The purpose is assessment, not victory. Your defeat will be educational." "For whom?" "For you, of course. And for us, to better understand human limitations." Grax'thal approached Jack, looming over him like a personified shadow. "I will restrain myself, small one. You may even retain consciousness." "Gee, thanks," Jack muttered. "That's very considerate." The Graxian combat instructor leaned down, voice lowered. "This is customary for all newcomers, but consider it an initiation." "Great." Jack was about to become the space station's hazing entertainment. The other Graxians were already placing bets, their translator units barely keeping up with the rapid exchange of wagers. "The matches will begin in 1 hour, Vrex announced. "Report to Training Arena 3. Preparation time begins now." As the crowd dispersed, Jack caught Quicks watching him with all 4 of their eyes, already preparing medkits. Not exactly a confidence booster. "Hey," Jack called out to Grax'thal's retreating form. "Any rules I should know about?" The Graxian turned, mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement. "No permanent maiming. No eye gouging. No death blows." He paused. "Unless they are very impressive, in which case you will be revived and given commendation before punishment." "Super helpful, thanks." Jack had an hour to prepare for getting his ass handed to him by an 8-foot alien predator. He briefly considered hiding in an escape pod but dismissed the idea. Running away would only confirm what the Graxians already thought about humans, that they were physically inferior and lacked proper warrior spirit. Instead, he headed to his quarters to change into more appropriate clothes. If he was going to get beaten up for interspecies relations, he might as well be comfortable while it happened. Training Arena 3 was packed by the time Jack arrived. The word had spread through the station faster than a virus in a recycled air system. Apparently, watching a human get dismantled by Grax'thal qualified as premium entertainment. The arena itself was a circular space about 50 feet in diameter, with padded floors and walls. Padded was relative, of course. They were designed to prevent Graxian scales from being scraped off, not to cushion the fall of a comparatively fragile human. Jack entered wearing what he considered appropriate sparring attire, loose-fitting pants, a sleeveless shirt, and his old combat boots from Earth. He'd taped his hands and wrists as if preparing for a boxing match, which had earned some curious stares in the corridor. The assembled Graxians formed a ring around the arena's perimeter, at least 60 of them by Jack's count. He spotted Commander Vrex in what appeared to be a place of honor, seated on an elevated platform alongside other senior officers. They were consuming something that looked like blue jerky while watching the proceedings with reptilian intensity. Kix approached Jack with a small device. "I need to attach this vital monitor," they explained, pressing the coin-sized disc against Jack's temple. "It will alert me if you're about to die." "That's reassuring." "Standard procedure," Quix replied cheerfully. "Though I've prepared extra supplies of human-compatible synthetic blood, just in case." "You're a real morale booster, you know that?" Right on the opposite side of the arena, Grax'thal was going through what could only be described as a terrifying warm-up routine. He moved with fluid grace, his massive body executing precise strikes and movements that seemed impossible for someone his size. Several younger Graxians were watching him with obvious admiration. "He's showing off," said a voice beside Jack. It was Traz, arms crossed over his chest. "This is his first chance to test a human in combat. He intends to make an example of you." "Lucky me," Jack muttered. "His technique favors overwhelming force and intimidation," Traz continued. "He expects you to be frightened." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Are you giving me advice? Isn't that against some Graxian warrior code?" Traz made a sound that might have been a chuckle. "I have credits wagered on this match." "Let me guess you bet on Grax'thal." "No, I bet you would last at least 30 seconds. With that, Traz moved away to join the other spectators. Great. His one sort of friend on the station had faith he could avoid unconsciousness for half a minute. Career highlight right there. Grax'thal finished his warm-up and strode to the center of the arena. He wore minimal equipment, just a protective cup for what Jack assumed were sensitive areas and padded gloves over his already deadly hands. The gloves weren't to protect Jack, they were to prevent Grax'thal from accidentally disemboweling his opponent and ending the fun too quickly. "Human Murphy," Grax'thal called out, his translator rendering his clicks and hisses into English. "Join me in the circle of honor." Jack walked forward, aware of every eye tracking his movement. The size difference between them was almost comical, like a house cat squaring up against a tiger. "Remember," Commander Vrex announced from his seat, "this is an assessment spar. Victory is achieved by submission or incapacitation. Medical intervention will be provided as necessary." Grax'thal lowered himself into a fighting stance, his tail sweeping behind him for balance. "I will not use my full strength against you, human. It would be unsporting." Jack stretched his neck from side to side. "That's real generous of you, Grax. Mind if I call you Grax? Seems like we should be on a first-name basis if you're going to beat me unconscious." A murmur ran through the crowd. Graxians didn't understand human humor particularly well, but they recognized what they perceived as pre-battle bravado. "You display courage," Grax'thal said, "even if misplaced. I will remember your name after you wake in the medical bay." Commander Vrex raised a clawed hand. "Combatants ready?" Grax'thal nodded, eyes never leaving Jack. Jack gave a thumbs up. "Ready as I'll ever be. Begin." Time seemed to slow as Grax'thal launched himself forward, covering the distance between them with alarming speed. The Graxian's approach was textbook intimidation, direct, aggressive, confident. Exactly what Jack had been counting on. Here's what the spectators expected. The human would either freeze in fear or attempt to dodge, giving Grax'thal the opportunity to display his superior reflexes before pinning Jack to the mat in a humiliating takedown. Here's what actually happened. Second one. As Grax'thal closed in, Jack stepped forward rather than back, entering the Graxian's space before the larger fighter anticipated. This wasn't bravery, it was physics. The further Grax'thal's limbs were from his center of mass, the less force he could generate. Second two. Jack dropped his weight, one leg sweeping forward to target the inside of Grax'thal's advancing leg. The Graxian's momentum worked against him, his knee buckling at the unexpected point of contact. Second three. Using the momentary destabilization, Jack pivoted, placing himself alongside the stumbling Graxian rather than in front of him. His right hand shot out, fingers rigid, striking precisely at the junction where Grax'thal's jaw met his neck. A nerve cluster that Jack had observed during training sessions was particularly sensitive on Graxians. Second four. Grax'thal's head jerked to the side involuntarily. A hiss of surprise escaped him as his right arm flailed to regain balance. Jack was already moving again, ducking under the arm and positioning himself at the Graxian's back. Second five. With remarkable precision, Jack's elbow struck the base of Grax'thal's spine, right where a particular scale pattern indicated another nerve cluster. The Graxian's massive tail spasmed, further compromising his stability. Second six. As Grax'thal began to turn slower now, his movements hampered by the targeted strikes, Jack leapt upward, wrapping his arms around the Graxian's thick neck from behind. Not a chokehold, but leverage. Second seven. Using the Graxian's own weight against him, Jack pulled backward while simultaneously hooking his legs around Grax'thal's right thigh. The off-balance predator toppled backward, unable to counter the unexpected direction of force. Second eight. They hit the mat together, Grax'thal on his back with Jack still latched behind him. The impact knocked wind from the Graxian's lungs, producing a sound like a deflating accordion being thrown downstairs. Second nine. Before Grax'thal could recover, Jack released his neck hold and slid around to the side, his hands moving with practiced efficiency to locate and press specific points along the Graxian's ribcage, points that corresponded to nerve clusters Jack had studied in the station's biological database. Second 10. Grax'thal's right arm went limp as the nerve block took effect. His left arm swung wildly at Jack, but the human was already moving again, rolling clear of the strike. Second 11. Jack completed his roll directly into a pouncing position, launching himself onto Grax'thal's chest. His hands found the Craxian's throat, thumbs pressing precisely on the carotid pressure points different in Craxians than humans, but serving the same purpose. Second 12. Grax'thal's eyes widened as blood flow to his brain was temporarily restricted. His functioning arm scrabbled at Jack's hands, but found no purchase. 3 seconds of this would render him unconscious, and they both knew it. "Yield," Jack said calmly, maintaining the pressure. The silence in the arena was absolute. 60+ Craxians stood frozen, mandibles slack in collective shock. Grax'thal tapped the mat 3 times with his functioning hand, a universal signal of submission. "Tier." Jack immediately released the pressure and rolled off the combat instructor, rising to his feet in one smooth motion. He extended a hand down to the fallen Craxian, a human gesture of sportsmanship that was definitely not part of Craxian combat protocol. Commander Vrex's voice broke the silence. 12 seconds. The human wins. The medical bay of Epsilon 9 wasn't designed for social gatherings, but it had become one anyway. Grax'thal sat on an examination table as Quix ran a neural scanner over his neck and spine, while a crowd of Craxians hovered nearby, their usual disciplined formations abandoned in favor of getting a good view. Jack stood awkwardly to the side, holding an ice pack to his ribs where Grax'thal's tail had clipped him during the fall. It was his only injury from the match. "Temporary nerve compression only," Quix announced, their 4 arms working different medical devices simultaneously. "No permanent damage. Full function should return within the hour." Grax'thal flexed his previously immobilized arm, mandibles clicking in what Jack had learned was their equivalent of thoughtful consideration. The technique was unfamiliar. "It should be," Jack replied. "It's not exactly standard military training." Commander Vrex pushed through the crowd, his senior rank parting the onlookers like a hot knife through butter. "Explain yourself, Human Murphy. Your personnel file lists your background as diplomatic security. Those were not security tactics." Jack sighed. "The jig, as they said on Earth, was up. My full designation is Lieutenant Jack Murphy, Earth Special Forces, Gravitational Adaptation Unit." A murmur ran through the assembled Craxians as their translators processed this information. "Gayu?" Vrex's eyes narrowed. "I am unfamiliar with this designation." "We're a specialized combat unit trained specifically for non-Earth gravity environments and," Jack paused, "non-human opponents." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "You have units trained to fight other species?" Grax'thal asked, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "Not exactly. We're trained to understand different physiologies and how they affect combat capabilities. It's primarily defensive." Jack set down his ice pack. "Look, humanity's not new to the galactic stage, but we're smaller and physically weaker than most spacefaring species. We had to develop ways to level the playing field." Vrex's scales rippled a sign of agitation. "Your diplomatic credentials made no mention of this specialized training." "Would you have allowed me on board if they had?" Jack countered. "And—" The commander didn't answer, which was answer enough. Traz pushed forward from the crowd. "The betting pool needs resolution. Did you deliberately mislead us about your capabilities?" Jack shook his head. "I never claimed to be harmless. You all just assumed because I'm smaller and softer." "A reasonable assumption," Grax'thal noted, rotating his shoulder experimentally. "Until today." "So what happens now?" Jack asked, looking around the medical bay. "Am I being kicked off the station?" Commander Vrex made a gesture Jack hadn't seen before, claws splayed, then retracted. "The exchange program continues. But your training regime will be adjusted." "Adjusted how?" "You will instruct selected personnel in your techniques," Vrex stated. "And in return, we will provide more advanced combat training than previously planned." Jack blinked in surprise. "So instead of diplomatic security, I'm now the human combat instructor?" "Precisely. Rex's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. It seems there is more to learn from humans than we anticipated. As the crowd began to disperse, Grax'thal approached Jack. The Graxian combat instructor towered over him, but his posture lacked the dismissive quality it had held before. "The nerve strike to my neck," he said quietly. "How did you know the precise location?" Jack shrugged. "I've been studying Graxian physiology in my off hours. Your medical database is quite comprehensive." "For treatment purposes," Grax'thal noted, "not for identifying vulnerabilities. Where I come from, we call that creative research." Grax'thal stared at him for a long moment. "I have much to learn about humans, it seems." "That makes two of us," Jack replied, offering his hand in the human gesture of agreement. After a moment's hesitation, the Graxian extended his much larger hand and carefully grasped Jack's. None of the observing Graxians understood the significance of the handshake, but they all understood that something fundamental had shifted in their understanding of humans. 3 weeks after the incident, as it had come to be known throughout Epsilon 9, Jack found himself in the station's observation lounge. The vast window offered a spectacular view of the nearby nebula, clouds of purple and blue gas illuminated by distant stars. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Jack said without turning as he heard the distinctive sound of Graxian footsteps approaching. "Chaotic," Commander Vrex replied, moving to stand beside him, yet structured in ways not immediately apparent. "Sounds like you're not talking about the nebula anymore." Vrex made a sound that Jack had recently learned was the Graxian version of a chuckle. "Perhaps not." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the slow dance of cosmic gases. "Your combat classes are popular," Vrex finally said, "even among senior officers." "I noticed. Traes has quite the aptitude for human martial arts, and Grax'thal speaks highly of your strategic mind." "Meke." Vrex turned to face Jack directly. "This was not the cultural exchange we anticipated." Jack smiled. "Cultural exchanges rarely go as planned. That's what makes them valuable." "Indeed." The commander hesitated, then continued, "The High Command has requested a full report on human combat capabilities based on your demonstrations." "And what will you tell them?" Vrex's scales rippled in what Jack now recognized as the Graxian equivalent of amusement. That humans are deceptively dangerous. Small, soft, yet capable of dismantling a superior predator in 12 seconds when properly motivated. "You make us sound like some kind of galactic threat. Are you not?" The question wasn't accusatory, merely curious. Jack considered this. "We're adaptable. When we first ventured into space and met species like the Graxians, we knew we couldn't match your physical strength. So we developed other advantages, such as studying the nervous systems of potential adversaries, such as understanding those we might need to defend ourselves against," Jack corrected. "Your work alongside." The station's intercom system interrupted their conversation. "Lieutenant Murphy, please report to Training Arena 2. Your advanced grappling class begins in 10 minutes. Duty calls," Jack said with a mock salute. As he turned to leave, Vrex spoke again. "Lieutenant." "Yeah." "Yes, Commander?" "The next diplomatic representative from Earth. Should we expect similar surprises?" Jack grinned. "Every human is different, Commander. That's what makes us interesting." "And unpredictable," Vrex added. "Exactly." Jack paused at the doorway. "By the way, I've noticed more Graxians studying human culture in the database lately. Any particular reason?" Vrex's mandibles clicked in what Jack now recognized as their version of a smile. "Your allies, Lieutenant. Especially the ones who can take down elite warriors in 12 seconds." As Jack made his way to the training arena, he passed a group of young Graxian officers who nodded to him with newfound respect. One even attempted a human-style salute, though the anatomy differences made it look more like she was swatting at an invisible fly. In the arena, 20 Graxians waited attentively for their human instructor. At the back of the group, Grax'thal stood with arms crossed, his previously dismissive demeanor replaced with genuine interest. "Today," Jack announced as he entered, "we'll be covering how leverage can overcome superior strength. or as we call it on Earth, how David took down Goliath. A Graxian in the front row raised a clawed hand. Who are David and Goliath? Jack smiled. An ancient human story about an unexpected victory. Believe me, you'll appreciate the reference by the end of class. As he began the demonstration, Jack couldn't help but think that this wasn't what either humans or Graxians had expected from the exchange program. But maybe that was the point. Sometimes the best diplomatic progress came from a good old-fashioned ass-kicking, especially when it only took 12 seconds.